Right. So regarding the TMM episode, I think it was he was mentioned that like none of us had a position. So Sim clearly made his position as far as like where he was at, right? After watching 3 episodes. But I thought I was pretty like clear in that like there's a lot of people that's 80% of the community. Like
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
reality, right? But
But
like
the
I'm not sure.
question,
You go ahead.
right? Yeah, the question of like whether this is in the community or not, I feel like that's almost like kind of taken a backseat to conversations about um, is this the majority of Muslims? Should we how should we be reacting to this? Is this halal? Is this haram? Does this conversation even matter? And like, I don't think anybody disagrees that there are people like this. You know what I mean?
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of Boys in the Cave. My name is Tanzim and I'm joined by a special co-host Mahin from the Mad Mamluks. And we're also joined by a dear friend of ours. So Tareq Tamr is a medical student from Canada who is active with youth work in the Muslim community. And you guys will definitely know him through social media, especially on Twitter. He's very outspoken, has voices his opinions about issues that happen in the Muslim community as well. So Assalamu alaikum both to Mahin and Tareq, and welcome to Boys in the Cave. We were touching on the famous show Ramy. That's, famous or infamous, I guess. It depends on the perspective you're from. So the Mad Mamluks did an episode on Ramy, and that's why I wanted to get Tareq on to get his perspectives, because I know he has a bit of a different perspective or a different take to the TV show Ramy. Before we jump into it, we'll give a quick summary for those who haven't watched Ramy at all. It's a TV show by comedian Ramy, who's Muslim, is Egyptian, and the TV show is pretty much showing, to be honest, it's it's a bit you can take a different perspective. So from my perspective, he's talking about the deen. He's relating to his interaction with Islam throughout his life, but at the same time it's referring, he's openly sinning on camera. He's hooking up, and there's sex scenes as well. So that's where the issue is. And I guess that's what I want to discuss, if it's good, if it's bad, or whatnot. But I want to ask Tareq first specifically, what's your take on the TV show in general? Do you feel it was good, it was bad? Was it a bit of both? What's just your general take on the TV show?
Yeah, so Bismillah wa salatu wasalam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi sahbihi man wala. So when it comes to the TV show in general, before kind of going into the show specifically, I think anything that we consume, we want to try to be mindful about it. We want to make sure that, there is, even if it's something that we're consuming for the sake of entertainment, you kind of want to go into it with a little bit of intentionality, knowing exactly what you're signing up for, why you're doing it, etc. So, going into the show and hearing ahead of time that it's going to show X, Y, and Z, haram things, that to me, this is a genuine enough reason for somebody to stay away from the show. So when I heard about it, actually, I heard about the show, I saw the trailer, and that was it. I hadn't read any reviews or anything like that. And I went into it, I watched it really briefly. And in general, I think the haram kind of quote unquote stuff that are in the show are enough of a valid reason for a person to kind of personally take the decision to not watch something like this. But at the same time, the conversation around the halal and haram aspect of the show, I feel like has overshadowed many of the issues that the show brings to light that we should try to grapple with. So I would just start like very briefly with saying the guy himself, Ramy Youssef is the name of the actor. Everything that I've heard about him from people who have met him in real life, people who grew up around him, who went to school with him, everybody has been, as well as some of the people he's approached for advice. Everybody has said that the brother seems like a very genuinely concerned Muslim who cares about the Muslim community. Now, whether he comes from a background of Islamic knowledge and all of this, not necessarily. But he cares. Like, he's a person who legitimately cares about Islam, and he reached out to people of knowledge and scholars, maybe a little bit after the fact, kind of asking them for advice on how he should deal with this and whatnot. But some people are just demonizing him and demonizing the entire show as this is an attempt to spread liberal ideology to the Muslim community and to spread the haram and fisq amongst the people. That's the way that they're presenting it. If that's the way that we start the conversation off, we're not really going to get anywhere productive. Like that, we have to start first with forget the person and his intentions. And even by saying this. By saying, leave the intention, some people might have an issue with that. They're saying, no, it's very clearly, wrong. But the important thing is, I think when it comes to him as an individual, he seems from everything that I've seen, like he sincerely cares about Muslims. Now that obviously does not validate what he has done. And it doesn't mean that we give him a pass just because he might have good intentions, because, we still have to say the truth. We have to be kind, we have to be gentle and whatnot, but we still have to speak the truth, whether he's, sincere or insincere.
I think there's a bit to unpack there, because you mentioned the idea that there is haram in it. So people are pretty much warned about the show, and it's not like you have to watch the show, right? To me, that seems a bit, what can I say? It kind of underplays the nature of media and how powerful it is, because, for example, in the trailer, it did portray it as, okay, this is going to be about the Muslim experience. I remember in the trailer, it wasn't like full zina or the extent to what we anticipated when you watch the show. Literally the whole show, there was like literally minimum one or two sex scenes, like every single show, right? Every single episode. So I feel that it's kind of downplaying the fact that in order to get viewership, the trailer was made in a way in order to get Muslims to kind of view it, because they see it. They're trying to appeal to the idea that it's related to Muslims and it's a Muslim experience. You get what I mean?
Sure.
But I understand if someone watched episode 1 and they're like, okay, this is too explicit, I'm not going to watch the next few episodes. I get that. But the reality is that these TV shows actually normalizes this sort of culture amongst the wider community. So
okay,
we'll have
before we kind of that, even just that point of normalization, there's a lot to unpack there. One thing is, though, the actor Ramy Youssef, so when he's talked about this show, he's made it clear that he's not trying to represent every single Muslim or tell every single story or say that this is the way that the average Muslim is. He said this is about his own experience. This is about his, it's a you could say an exaggerated or a slightly changed version of like his upbringing and his experience. And even when you see the show,
but even just there with that point, wouldn't you say, because he's literally like the first Muslim guy to talk about have his own TV show to do with the Western Muslim experience, right? Wouldn't you say that in itself has a responsibility to at least portray, I guess, the Muslim community in at least positive light? Because we can go into the examples of there was no religious figure that was portrayed in the best of light throughout the whole TV show, right? Yeah, so he has those responsibilities. Yeah, sorry, mine.
But Tanzim, here's the thing, though, right? So what Tareq was mentioning in one of the interviews I heard last week is that he's saying that it's kind of he's like, it might represent an Arab family in North Jersey, if that, as broad as it's one to go, right? But I don't think he would be. Like, if that's really his reality, why would he portray a reality that's foreign to him? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. And even in terms of like, does he have a responsibility? Well, whether he was the first Muslim or not the first Muslim to have his own show, we always have a responsibility as Muslims to kind of do our best to present Islam. I guess we could say to present Islam in a good light, etc., etc. But if the goal of the show is to be authentic, then now that goal could be questionable. That goal can be problematic. But if that's the goal, then you might want to assess it in a little bit of a different light. Like that question of representation, right? I mean, when you look at Muslims in general, okay. So I spoke to a person from Yaqeen Institute, and they're actually working on basically doing this breakdown of the Muslim community and what are basically like the quote unquote types of Muslims or something similar to this. Now this is still kind of in development, but the way that he mentioned it was they have basically 3 broad groups. The first one would be connected Muslims. So these would be the Muslims who have some sort of connection with the Muslim community. They're in the Muslim space to some degree. So for example, these might be the types of people who will go to conferences, Islamic conferences and whatnot. So the next group would be the Muslim middle. So the Muslim middle, that would be somebody, for example, maybe a guy whose name is Ali or Ahmed, and he goes by the name, Alex. And maybe he occasionally will pray, like maybe once in Ramadan. Maybe he'll go to Salat al-Eid, Eid prayer. These are the people that you can call like kind of the Muslim middle. And then the third group would be the disconnected Muslims. So these people are entirely disconnected, pushed away. They're not really necessarily interested in being a part of the Muslim community in any capacity. Now, it's not to say that these three groups are, split, for example, 33% of the Muslim community in each group or anything like that. But if we want to look at Ramy and like which group he might represent, I don't think the show even tries to present him as being representative of a connected Muslim, if you want to call them that. Because immediately, like, for example, when he starts, when he like just wears in the show they'll call it a galabiya, or we might know it as a thawb. When he wears that kind of quote unquote Islamic garment, in Ramadan, like his parents immediately are like, you're a sheikh, basically. And when he basically says, I want to get married, his mom says something like, do you want her like with a scarf or without a scarf? And he says, I believe something like without a scarf. And she says, good, which is kind of immediately kind of like saying, yeah, like don't marry somebody who looks, at least on the outside, like they have, signs of religiosity. So they're not people who from just the general observer of a show, I think it's pretty clear that these are not people who are trying to be religious, if you want to call it that.
What I wanted to add though, because you mentioned, the authentic, I guess, representation for certain groups of Muslims in the community that are suffering these sort of issues. But me personally, like to say it out loud, I think it's rubbish and nonsense, because the examples he uses.
What exactly is rubbish?
He's hooking up with his cousin, like literally the last scene of the show. He gets with a woman from the masjid, hijabi.
Okay, but like that. You're saying this is.
Yeah, sorry.
You're saying this is a rubbish representation of what?
Just how can you say that it's an authentic representation of anything if you're bringing those examples that are obviously clear?
Sure, that's easy, man. That is an easy question to answer. I mean, I don't know about your experiences, either of you guys, your experiences with kind of, if we want to call this group like the Muslim middle, but man, there are a lot of Muslims who, will do things like this that shock you. I mean, I have seen Muslims come. I have seen Muslims come on Ramadan. This is a very real story. I was literally praying on, I believe it was the 27th night in Ramadan, and I had a friend come to the masjid. He texted me, I'm outside. I come out, I greet him and whatnot, and he's like, do you know where I just was? And I said, no, where were you at, man? And he's like, you want me to keep it 100 with you? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I'm no exaggeration, and close your ears if you're sensitive to these things. But he's like, I was just with a girl in my car. He's doing zina in his car with a girl on the 27th night of Ramadan, a day that he might have actually been fasting. And then he came to the masjid, and eventually he comes in, and there's qiyamul layl, and I'm like, so like you want to come and pray? He's like, I don't have I'm not tahir. He's like, I'm not pure. I have to go do ghusl. I'm like, so how am I supposed to react to that? I mean, for me in that situation, I told the guy, well, maybe like you want to go home and do ghusl. He's like, no, I'm good. I'm like, well, I guess you can just like make dua. But bro, there are a lot of Muslims like this in our community. I've dealt with Muslims. I dealt with a guy who told me once, he's like, the reason why he drinks alcohol and the reason why he smokes and he does all this stuff and like sleeps around, he's like, I did it once and I got used to it. He's like, once you break the ice, it becomes easier and easier to just do it over and over again. He's like, for you guys who have never done this stuff, it seems huge, but once you do it once, then it just gets easier. So like there are a lot of Muslims like this, man. I've seen Muslims drunk in the middle of Ramadan. Like this doesn't shock me.
I'm not denying the fact that happens, right? I don't think that's the conversation though. But it's the way, in the manner that he shows it happens. It's the way he kind of doesn't make the sacred anymore. So, for example, there was
So is your issue with him showing it?
So there's two issues, right? I'm saying it's exaggerated by nature. The scene with the hijabi from the mosque. How is that going to happen in real life? You take their son and then they sleep together literally like in an hour.
But here's my question though. Are you denying that these things happen, or are you just saying that like they're not common?
I'm saying how that does not happen on that regular, and you don't, even if there is people that are enjoying it, it's very small, minute. Not even in amongst the Muslim community, just in general. When you go to like a
sure. So if the comment is that these things are not very common, I don't think the show claims that these things are common. And even even for example, so that issue of when he does zina with a married woman from the masjid. That is not presented at any point as being normal. Like, he is shamed by it for his family, and he ends up flying out of the country. Like, it's not presented as something that is just, run of the mill, everyday action, just the stuff that happens. No, it's never presented like that. Now, if our issue is, well, by showing it that you're implying that it's normal, I don't think that's the case either. I think that's something that we might be reading into it.
And also, real quick, the fact that I think my first reaction was like, it doesn't happen that fast. But when you like listen to his interviews again, he's got 10 episodes. They're 20 minutes a pop. It's not like we're not watching Arturo, which has we have 500 hours to develop something. So I could see why they accelerated it. Obviously, I think it's unrealistic that it would in one night. Like, literally within 2 hours, that goes down from 0 to 100. But I think the exaggeration is something he covers in the interviews. That it's something he does amplify, right?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, there is zina happening with married couples, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Even that scene, though, for example, with for example that zina scene, I remember people talking about this then, and recently, and they're upset that they showed it, and I agree with that. I don't think that they should show anything like this. But the issue of, well, does this happen? This stuff does unfortunately happen. But also, number two, people acting like the show is presenting this as normal or as good or anything like that. It's anything but that. Early in the episode, right at the beginning, one of Ramy's non-Muslim friends sees him praying, and he says basically, "Pray for my mother. She has cancer." And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give shifa and healing to everybody with suffering from any illness. So he says, your prayer is what's keeping one of your other sick friends alive. So now her life is in your hands. And Ramy, he prays for her and whatnot. But towards the end of that episode, right immediately after the zina scene, he checks his phone and he's scrolling through social media, and he sees that his non-Muslim friend Sean, that he posts that his mom just passed away. So the juxtaposition of those things right there, it shows that Ramy is feeling like the fact that he cracked. And by the way, they make a point in the show to show that he is leaving zina for the month of Ramadan. He's staying away from women, etc. And that's, but he has these urges. And every time when he has these urges, they even show him, he gets the urge, he gets the temptation, and he shuts his laptop off and he goes to the masjid. But so he's fighting these urges, but an opportunity comes, he cracks under the pressure, and then they immediately show you that he has this regret and this sense that woman's death was on him for sinning. So we can have an issue with the show showing this stuff, but to present this as being the show is, quote unquote normalizing it, or it's, endorsing it or promoting it, it's anything but that.
But every time, the issue is every time there is a reference to anything religious, it's not taken seriously. Like, for example, you said the prayer scene, but then the way, even that scene, bro, when he was when he's reciting his mother's name during the salah, that was you know what I mean? There's that, and then there's the guy in the masjid, the white revered brother. He was talking about snorting coke and stuff in the masjid. there's so like every time, and then the first.
No, but that revert scene might have been, in my opinion, the best representation of Tawba that I've like seen on a show. Dude, that
But that's
revert, by
some
the way,
low
I don't know about
standards,
you
isn't
guys.
that though?
No, man, because look, that revert scene, for example, I have met a lot of new Muslims, converts, reverts, etc., whatever term you want to use. I have met a lot of Muslims who speak exactly like that guy talked. He was somebody who was very clearly deep in sins, right? So basically, long story short, Ramy walks into the masjid. He wants to find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He wants to find. He feels guilty. He goes to the masjid and he sees that there's a brother who is a convert and he is cleaning the masjid. And the guy goes, it seems like you want to talk to somebody. And so he starts sharing his experience of finding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he says, he shares a story that he was at a haram location. So he was at a club or whatever. And he was like doing cocaine with, I guess he said strippers or something like that. And he's like, I was doing that. And then suddenly like I realized, no, this isn't the way for me. And like he stops. And then like Ramy's like amazed by this. So yeah, the story is a little bit vulgar and, it's not something that we might, maybe we don't talk like that in quote unquote polite society. But there are a lot of people, especially people who grew up very distant from Islam or maybe not even Muslim at all. They talk like this. There are people that talk like this. And it's not presented as it's normal.
I'm more referring to
that it's
like,
good.
For example, every time there is a religious scene, it's not really showing Islam. It's just showing, like, for example, when he's doing stuff, Islam is meant to, we're not, as Muslims, you're not meant to drink and all that sort of stuff. But he's doing it anyway. So Islam throughout the whole show is just shown as some rules. And he's just breaking.
So here's the thing, man. The guy in the show. So I do agree, by the way, that I wish that there was more positive representation of we could say kind of practicing or religious Muslims. I do agree with that for sure. I also wish there was better representation of women in general in the show. More positive representation, I'll say. More kind of complete. But the important thing is, when it comes to the way that Islam is presented, the entire perspective of Ramy is somebody who is struggling to find a good representation of religion. That's the key struggle. Like, he doesn't come from a background of religiosity or practicing
I don't even
Islam.
see like how it even shows him trying to get closer with God. I just see it as a guy who does sins and he's just kind of unhappy and he's not married and he's struggling with cultural culture versus the society he lives. I don't actually see where's he...
Bro, you're missing so much then, man. You're missing so much because look, even that scene, for example, with the convert, what is it that ends up happening? The convert, basically Ramy says, like, I always thought of myself as like somebody who, so early in the episode, he tries weed for the first time. So he doesn't do drugs. That's something that he's adamant about. He doesn't do drugs. And he tries basically weed. He takes in like a weed pill or something. He trips out, he does whatever, and he comes to this masjid now guilty. He meets this convert who shares a story, and then what Ramy basically says is, I always thought of myself as somebody who just doesn't do that type of stuff. Like, yeah, he does some bad stuff, but I don't do weed, I don't do drugs. And the guy's like, you don't understand. Basically, that's a very egotistical way to look at religion, because the way that Islam works is not that you either are a person who does this or doesn't. As a Muslim, you sin and you repent, you turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you when you turn back sincerely. And what is it that he does? He basically encourages him, like, go reach back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then they show Ramy cleaning the masjid. He's cleaning the Qur'ans, and he's helping I believe the custodian of the masjid, basically. And they also show him praying. So they show him in that episode as he tried this drug, he felt bad, he went to the masjid, and as the hadith goes, you follow up a sin with a good deed to erase the sin. It's a part of Tawba. And that's what they show Ramy doing. So you might say, like, yeah, I do agree that there is kind of less than ideal positive representation of, religious figures, but the entire premise of the show is that this is a Muslim who did not grow up with a very religious background, and he's struggling with his identity and with finding Islam. That's the entire premise of the show. So even when he's praying for Sean's mother, and the prayer sounds a little bit funny. I mean, I've been in similar situations where non-Muslims kind of expect me to perform as a Muslim, and it might appear, humorous, but I felt like it was actually like it was funny, but it wasn't disrespectful to me. It was showing that he legitimately does not know how he's supposed to pray for this guy's mom, but he's trying.
That's yes.
Yeah. Hey, the one thing is that him on the podcast with Mad Mamluks. So we did it last week. I don't know when this episode is going to release, but the thing that the guys made on the show was that, if someone is sincerely trying to, because this whole thing, Tareq, you were we were chatting on like in the WhatsApp group while the show was going on, right? Yeah. I remember you were talking about like, one of the Human brought up the point about like there's no like real Tawba going on, right? Obviously, you're disagreeing with that through these examples, but one thing the guys mentioned as well was that like they don't show hope. They show like him struggling, trying, and then having everything just thrown back into his face, like grandfather dying.
I agree with that.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
mean, that's kind of like a disrespect. Now, I don't know how. Now, that might be realistic though, because it might be because at the same time, it's like I don't feel that like it's not like Tawba doesn't come necessarily easy for everybody either. Like it's not like you can just like say I repent, because there's like you got to think about all the sin, especially if the way we grew up is like zina is like the worst sin you can do, right? Like no matter what, you're better off converting to like Christianity than committing zina. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But like the thing is, but when you do a sin like that repeatedly, it's doing like serious damage to your soul. So maybe it's the reality is that you can't. It's not just going to be easy as like cleaning a masjid and you're fixed. You get what I'm saying?
Of course. Like I totally agree with that. Like even that point of saying like that the show doesn't really offer much hope. That was actually one of my first conclusions that I watched. I was like, I think if you're a Muslim who's struggling with the things that Ramy is going through, I don't think that you should watch a show like this, because the show shows the struggle, but it doesn't show the solution. It doesn't have a conclusion that tells you here's how he got out. Granted, that might not necessarily make for a good, long TV series, because this is just season 1. This is the introduction. So, maybe season 2, it could be better. Maybe it could be worse. Maybe it could be a little bit of the same. But what I think the show tries to do essentially is it's trying to depict the struggle and this constant back and forth. And like you mentioned, he has years and years of damage to kind of quote unquote undo. And even if he's sincere, and by the way, the character does seem like he sincerely loves Islam and he's sincerely trying to be a Muslim. That's one of my favorite things actually about the show, is that they don't present Islam as something to be something that, religiosity is bad, or religiosity is too extreme. It doesn't do that at all. Like he feels that he has shortcomings with, for example, that he can't he can't read Arabic. And he says, yeah, when I have kids, I want them to learn Arabic, and I'll take the classes with them so that they could see that, yeah, like their dad is trying too. So he at no point, in my opinion, does the show demonize religion or present himself as being, I just want to be like a cool, progressive, not an extreme Muslim. He doesn't do that at all. Like they don't present Islam as this thing that is extreme. It's actually something that he's aspiring towards. Now, we could say that representation doesn't offer a lot of hope, and I would actually agree with that, because the show's not done. It's just season 1, and there has to be, in my opinion, if we want a healthy representation, we want to see him at the end where basically he's made Tawba, but he's also turned his life around. And I would even say, like, ideally, you want to see him not only just turn his life around, but you want to see him contributing good and to be like a positive agent of change in his community. He has, for example, some of his friends he has at least one of his friends, Ahmed, who is like kind of the religious friend. And he tries to be kind of a good influence, but he's not necessarily a very powerful influence, at least in season 1. But ideally, you would want to see Ramy kind of become this person who's a little bit more like his friend Ahmed.
You don't actually see that he is, like, I don't actually even agree that the fact that he wants to aspire to something. He's just kind of in his own boat. And the fact that he shows Islam is a set of rules and he knows he's disobeying it, that's the guilt where it's coming from.
Bro, he literally goes to Egypt.
Yeah, because
he
he
literally
knows
goes to Egypt looking
but
for his
that's
grandfather.
because in like the current society that he's in, he only got guilt tripped because he saw those recordings with his grandfather and his father. So when he heard those, that got him triggered. So that when the grandfather said, "Look at your sons; they'll end up doing XYZ when they're in America," you're making the mistake of actually migrating to America. That's what triggers it. It's not necessarily, I aspire to be Islamic and Muslim, I'm going to go find your roots.
The tapes, so for context for people who don't know, the father left Egypt, and Ramy's grandfather tells his son, basically, if you go, your kids are going to lose their identity, they're going to grow up all mixed up, they're not going to know who they are, etc., etc. And Ramy, that's exactly how he feels. Like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm supposed to be. I feel messed up. And so he's listening to his father and his grandfather, and he's speaking, by the way, in kind of Islamic terms. Like he's basically saying, your kids are going to lose their deen if you go to Egypt, if you go to America. And Ramy is like this kid who he lost his deen. And so what is his reaction? His reaction is like, I want to go to Egypt. He goes to Egypt, and what happens? Immediately he's asking his family there, I want to go to the mosques. His cousin is like, no, let's go to the club. And the guy, he's like, man, I really don't want to go to the club. This is the stuff that I'm trying to leave. I really want to visit the mosques. He says it repeatedly. And then what is it that his cousin responds with, basically? Oh, like, we thought you were cool. We thought you were this. And so Ramy's like, all right, like, I'll go for you guys. But then what is it that he does? Like, the next day, his cousin is supposed to take him to visit his grandfather in the village. And his cousin is like hungover or something from the party. And so he's like, all right, I'm going to go on my own then. So he goes on his own. The car breaks down on the way there. What is it that Ramy does? He walks through the desert looking for his grandfather. And he starts hallucinating. He starts doing whatever. Eventually he gets to his grandfather. Now, big spoiler here if you plan to watch the show. But what is it that ends up happening? He goes to meet his grandfather. His grandfather is clearly this representation of religion. And his grandfather's like, okay, go basically get washed up, whatever, and I'm going to give you all of the wisdom that I've learned. And then Ramy comes downstairs and he finds that his grandfather died. It's dark, but it's also a little bit funny where you're like, bro, this is what the show built up to. And we don't actually get this sage advice. And eventually by the end,
Yeah, sorry?
Eventually by the end of the episode, his cousin takes him to a masjid, and we might disagree maybe with like the way that masjid scene was represented, and like maybe this isn't the ideal image of religiosity, but it's clearly meant to be a scene that shows a positive religious experience. And he has it, he benefits from it, but then when he leaves it, he he decides to act on this urge, which is to kiss his cousin, because he thinks that like, I've finally found somebody who I connect with on a spiritual level. So you could see how his understanding of love and relationship and spirituality is messed up.
That point kind of undone everything you said, because it's the fact that he's only doing it to fulfill his nafs. Yeah, because if he really had that real, like, he only left from America to Egypt. I actually disagree with the point that it's really religious based. It's the fact that he's just culturally lost. He's just lost that he knows he's culturally Egyptian, and he's actually taking, he's going through what the West wants it to.
Can you give an evidence for that? Like, why do you think it's based on culture?
Because he knows that he has urges to do zina and all this stuff, but he just knows that Islam prohibits it. So he's just confused.
How's that culture?
But that doesn't mean that. But that doesn't mean he's aspiring to be religious. He's just confused. So when those tapes kind of trigger him to move
but when he goes, what is it that he looks for in Egypt? The first thing, and he constantly keeps asking for it, is the mosques. That's religion, bro. It's not culture.
Yeah, but that's what, mosques are related to culture as well.
No, they're not. They're not. And you literally
you don't
see that.
It as a sign of religiosity per se.
Bro, everybody around him in Egypt is telling him, yo, like, just come chill. Let's go to these restaurants. Let's go to the party. And he says, I want to go to the mosque. That's not culture, bro. That's very clearly telling
that
people,
is culture, because he knows he's trying to stay away from what he's already endured in the West, because he knows that scene is, clubbing and all that sort of. So he wants to get away from it. He just wants to reconnect.
Do you agree that Islam
culture.
Then is a part of that culture?
No, that's not the point. The point is that you're saying really religiosity, like he's aspiring to be pious. I did not see that at all. I'm just seeing
I'm not
someone
saying
that's kind of.
necessarily to be pious, but he's trying to get in touch with we could say with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with religiosity to some degree. Like he
But then
wants
there's
to.
no sense of guilt. There's no sense of shame shown throughout those whole. I guess
How
your
could
example
you say
was.
that, bro? I am mind blown by hearing you say that, bro. This is literally the result of when he comes home and his dad basically tells him, how could you do this? Like he gets word that Ramy slept with the woman from the masjid. He's like, how could you do this? You're like this is a marriage. This is a family, and he feels guilty. And he's listening to the tapes, and it's dark, and like even when they show him listening to the tapes of his grandfather, bro, the scene goes blank, and all you hear is the audio clips. It's so very clearly meant to show a sense of like somber and deep reflection. I don't know how you could say that it doesn't show regret.
Because to me, it's trying to liberalize, religion, and it's trying to get rid of that guilt.
Wait, can you give evidence for this?
Just everything that he's pretty much doing. There's no sense of remorse, shame, guilt. Every time,
I'm literally giving you points, telling you that he's feeling shame and remorse.
As a director, as I mentioned, like I disagree with the points when he's in the mosque. The white revert brother. It's desacralize. How do you call it? It's making the sacred not sacred, because in those moments you're not meant to just say things openly, and the majority of Muslims don't do that. That's what I'm saying.
Bro,
so,
but look at the way that look at what you're doing, by the way, with the way that you're presenting religiosity. You're saying we need to talk about religion in this kind of very respectful manner, etc., etc. And I understand that. But the reality is, bro, when you actually are doing da'wah on the ground, especially with people who are far away from religion, it's never this sanitized. You're dealing with people who are open about a lot of their struggles. And the thing is, we can't be so. Now, again, I think it's a valid concern for us to say that the way that this stuff is spoken about, represented, is not ideal. Okay, but the way that you're going about this critique is, you're saying like they're disrespecting the religion in the way that you're talking. I'm saying this is accurate, and it not only is it accurate, it doesn't show to me a disrespect of the religion. It just shows maybe less than ideal etiquette. But this is how a lot of people talk about the religion when they are legitimately trying to find it. Like that guy in the masjid, when he's talking in this manner, he's not giving a khutbah. He's talking about his experience. Literally, that's what happened. He was doing crack in a club, and he talks about it in a way that's a little vulgar, but that's what happened.
You're
what are we gonna say? We can't talk about it?
You're analyzing from perspective of the character saying it in the show. I'm talking about the fact that because he's the director as well, I think, or he's the writer of the show. He's actually putting those moments into the show that are pretty much, it does not happen.
Sure, and that's a point that I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, but I will totally give you that as a production, I don't agree with the way that this production goes about, and I don't think that people, like for me personally, I think if you're an individual who wants to be mindful of not consuming haram, you want to avoid this. This is not the type of show that should be consumed for entertainment. Okay. But if you are, say, for example, I think maybe some of the parents in our community, some of the elders of our community, the leaders, I think it's actually important that they have some exposure to this show. And of course, there's ways to skip over the haram and whatnot. But I do think it's important for them, if they don't know what's happening with our youth, for them to actually watch this thing to some degree. Because even though it doesn't sit well with us and it's uncomfortable, it is actually very accurate. So we can disagree with the production while also taking some benefit from it for those of us who kind of can benefit from it. Does that make sense?
Well, what's your take on it, Mahin, in terms of extracting benefit and rejecting?
So one of the things that you guys were talking about back and forth about, like how you felt like he wasn't really trying to be like, I know on our show last week, we were joking about like how the only takeaway he got from his mixed gender hadra was like to make out with his cousin. But like, that's one angle, like, right. But then like, I find myself agreeing with a lot of Tareq's points here, because there is a reality on the ground that a lot of us are in this bubble that we're not aware of. And for a guy who's like a pretty much like a a perpetual fornicator, kissing his cousin isn't a big deal. You get what I'm saying? That's nothing.
Yeah.
That's just like, whatever. It's just like people now give like, if you're a little loose on intergender, you'll give someone a side hug or something, right? That's what some, Muslims say, side hug is halal. That's a new, I don't know if Tareq, you've heard that or not. But it reminds me of the thing of it goes back to, there's this ideal that we're trying to present. I don't think Ramy, I may have mentioned this on our show last week, that it's not even that he's trying to, he can't even present what should be an idealized version of religion because he himself as an actor doesn't know that. That's part of the whole point. Like he doesn't know, this is again, his reality and whatnot. As far as like how we deal with what's going on. I don't know if you guys heard on the show last week, I mentioned that like on Eid in like 2005, I think it was Eid al-Fitr, whatever. And this is like when I was like hardcore, like in my hardcore days, I ended up going to my friend's house. My friend was like he was in the U.S. military, but we grew up together, right? And he opens the door and he's holding some kid, like a 6-month-old baby. And I'm like, "Who's this kid your mom's babysitting?" He's like, "No, this is my daughter," because he knocked up his girlfriend, right? And so my dad was like, "You got to cut him off. This is not appropriate for somebody of." You're a religious guy that prays 5 times a day. I think I was MSA president at the time as well. And he's like, you can't like associate with that. It's bad. It's not a good look. And I'm like, if I'm not friends with them, then it's just going to be like perpetual down the, everyone else is down the drain. But like, I think the Tareq is, I think what I'm hearing from Tareq is that like, there is a lot of this happening. And if we're in these boxes that we're like, all right, yeah, it should be like this. So therefore, we're just gonna like turn our brain off, or this is, and then blame everything on an agenda. I think to like blame this on some kind of agenda, by the left, to be honest, is a little silly because I don't think they're thinking about it that deep. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it does a disservice to the legitimate benefits that we can take. And at the same time, by the way, I mean, one of the reasons why I've been hesitant to speak about this, for example, on like social media, like I haven't posted about this on my Facebook, for example, or on my public Twitter account and whatnot. I don't know exactly how we are supposed to engage with this necessarily in public, or I don't know what necessarily the best way to engage with it in public is. So this is something I was actually telling you guys before we started the show. I'm hesitant to initiate this because I actually I'm not sure if I want to encourage people to watch the show. I do think, like I said earlier, like for example, some of the elders, etc., they really should see this, while of course skipping the haram, etc., etc. But like even like Mahin, you were saying, like blaming this on the left or blaming this on whatever. It does a disservice to what we can actually take away, which is there are Ramis in our community. Now, whether this is the majority of the community or not, it doesn't matter. If we just reduce this conversation into the halal and the haram of should we watch this or should we not, it actually, that's not the goal of the show. Or at least this isn't the main benefit that I think we could take away from the show. The main benefit is these are these are a real part of our community. There's a lot of Ramis in our community, as well as many different other characters that are on the show. They exist. Now, what are we actually doing to improve our community so that a person like Ramy does not feel like he has no answers or that he has to go to Egypt to look for them? Because I do wish, for example, that they were able to show in the masjid or in the community like a active imam who is reaching out to the community, maybe youth directors, maybe Islamic programming, maybe there's events that are going on, because in some of the more developed communities in the West, these things do exist. There is people that you can reach out to. If you go to the masjid, you will find people who want to help you. This exists, but I also know there are many communities where that's not the case. I've seen a lot of masajid where, and even now, if some kids, they turn around and they say, yo, I want to fix my life. Sometimes you really don't have somewhere that you could immediately send them to. You might say, hey, there's an event in a week or there's an event in a month. But how many people can immediately turn and find answers? This is, a privilege that maybe some of us who are well connected to quote unquote, righteous people, we take this for granted. And also I just want to make one side point, just to go back to the point of like how his religious experience in Egypt is undone by kissing his cousin. Obviously we don't support this type of thing. But the whole idea here, if you see in the beginning of the show, Ramy has an aversion to having relations with Muslim women. Like, he's taken aback in that first episode by this Muslim woman who's very open about, kind of wanting to do zina with him. Yes, there's a whole experience in Ramadan, but that's kind of presented as being something that is, it's the result of him not being able to control himself in a moment of kind of having held himself back from the sin for weeks in Ramadan. Like, he was struggling all throughout Ramadan, and then he cracked. But the point is now, when this thing happens with his cousin, what's the basis of his connection with his cousin? Yes, he's attracted to her because of how she looks physically, but he's like, we connect on a spiritual level. She's the first person in Egypt that he came across who was like, I'm going to take you to a masjid. So he's like, okay, I know that we shouldn't do this, but this is how much I love that spiritual connection that we have. So again, I'm not justifying this, but for us to present this as him kind of as this undoes the progress, I just feel like that's a very reductive way to view it. Like, we need to be able to disagree with what's happening while not reducing it into, just some black and white, good versus bad situation,
I think I don't disagree with your points in terms of these are happening in the community. I don't think that's the main issue though. I'm saying that what he's done is taken a few examples, made it exaggerated to an extent where it's desacralizing.
I don't know how you could say that they've made it exaggerated if we agree that this stuff happens.
Okay, so hooking up with the cousin, constantly fornicating, Ramadan, gets with the hijab in the mosque,
happens,
in the mosque, but all this stuff at once. Do you really?
This happens. I know people who legitimately would only go to the masjid in Ramadan to meet up with women.
But then, okay, so what we're doing though is you're saying that there's one case or there's few cases, that means that it has to be shown. Okay, because there's a lot to unpack. It's the fact.
No, I'm not saying it has to be shown. I'm not saying it has to be shown. I'm just saying that if we acknowledge that this is a reality, I don't see why our whole conversation. I think that our conversation talking about whether this is an exaggeration or not, I feel like this is a distraction from the main point of the conversation, which should be, if this is real, what should we be doing to change this? And I feel like it's
okay. So, but
for
that's
us,
not
kind of quote-unquote religious Muslims.
That's not being addressed in the show. That's what I'm trying to get at. You're saying that.
Of course, but this is a conversation starter. This is now for us to talk about it. But what have we been doing in the religious space?
All of us, like for example, me, you, Mahin, alhamdulillah, we're practicing this and that, so we can look at it from that lens. But what about the rest of society? It's just normalizing from them. You're coming from a different perspective.
Sure. Okay, so you're saying it's normalizing. Okay, I want to hit on that because that's the word that I've seen everybody tossing around. If we talk about something, are we necessarily validating it?
There's no sense of guilt shown in the show. There's no sense of
you keep saying that, and I keep giving you examples of guilt being shown. And like, Mahin, do you have anything to say about that?
I see that there's definitely guilt going on. The normalization to me, the way I'm hearing it, it's resonating less and less with me, because like we talked about it, like the Game of Thrones example. I don't want to throw my Game of Thrones fans under. You guys watching Game of Thrones? I haven't seen a single episode of my life.
Nah, stuck for Allah.
Allah's
but like, I don't know what came up on the show last week. So some people were like, "Well, you guys watch Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones is legit, has incest and like open nudity, etc." And people talk about it, but isn't that normal? Because I think you could make, if you want to talk about normalization, there's a lot of things that's normal that we normalize.
But you're attaching, you're making Islam.
In Game of
you're
Thrones,
making Islam and you're linking it, so it's even more dangerous though. Like in the show.
No, but what they're doing in the show,
right? Like, okay, so it'll be a test for these Game of Thrones fans, because Game of Thrones is going to be running in Ramadan, right? Right? Am I not? I believe, because it's every Sunday, so there's going to be episodes in Ramadan. So when you have Muslims watching Game of Thrones, and listen, dude, like nobody's fast forwarding through no scenes. Like, ain't nobody fast forwarding through nothing, man. If anything, it's like on slow mo. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that the fact that Muslims talk about watching something that everyone knows has like stuff in it, that's normalization too. That's still linking Islam with it. I don't see how that's any different.
I mean, that's why I think we have to recognize something, man. When we talk about something, it's just bringing it to light. That's not necessarily validating it, right? Sometimes by talking about it, we're just acknowledging that this is an unfortunate reality and that we need to take steps towards addressing this issue. The first step is to talk about it, you know? And what the show does when it's raising these issues, again, it's constantly presenting these issues as a struggle for the character. And Ramy himself says it. Like, if you listen to his actual interviews about the show, he's talking about it. He's like, it's representing a struggle. Like, anybody who's saying no, it's just normalizing it. I don't think, at least in my experience in the show, with what I saw the show, what I recall of the show, I don't think he's valid. Like, I want to know which sins they're saying the show's validating. Because if it comes to zina, the character literally says, Ramy literally says, I wish I can go back to before I ever did it. Because since I've done it, it's made my life miserable. And the way that he talks about it is pretty funny. But he's actively rejecting it. He's actively condemning it, even though he keeps falling back into it. And so that's why for me, I can't take this like the point of like the show is quote unquote normalizing. You have to tell me what normalizing it means, because it's talking about it, but it doesn't validate this. Now, we can say that somebody who watches this show, who engages in these types of sins, if they watch this show, they might feel like this is more normal, and so maybe they might feel less guilt about what they do. I can understand that point. But does the show itself promote or validate these sins? In my opinion, it doesn't. And I think it actually validates Tawba and turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they don't show a complete Tawba or a Tawba that is, kind of reached its conclusion. It shows, I mean, to me, when we look at the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, every son of Adam is a sinner, and the best of the sinners is those who repent. The idea of the sinner in this hadith is it's somebody who repeats the sin more than once. It's over and over and over. And not necessarily one sin, but falling into sins constantly. This is our reality as human beings. Now, the show represents that. We can have an issue maybe with the way that it's represented, but I don't think it's trying to validate those sins. We have seen a lot of representations of Muslims, by the way, that validate sins. We see that constantly. I think to treat this show, Ramy, as being just one of those examples is a massive disservice, and I think it's intellectually dishonest.
I think, okay, so I agree with you with the points that I think what we have like the practicing Muslim lens, right? And we're judging. So you actually brought up a good point about the guilt and, people doing those sins, they won't have as much guilt. That's more the point I'm going towards. But at the same time, let's just say I had this discussion with Raphael before this episode just about the show. But he's like, for example, I was telling him that if we had this exact same show, but it was just, I don't know, it was a Hindu themed show, or it feels like a Christian themed show where, it's more showing, Christian, I don't know, religious symbols and customs and rituals and whatnot, right? If it was emphasizing on that, I would say it would be pretty like decent, funny show, right? Because there's no attachment to the deen to it. There's like, I don't have to feel guilty about it. You get what I mean? But the thing is though, wouldn't you say, being, Muslims being a minority in the West, being like a first sort of Muslim show, the Western experience of a Muslim living in the West, wouldn't Ramy have a bit more of a responsibility to portray, because you said it yourself, the way that some characters were presented or religious figures were presented, you didn't agree with. But don't you feel that there is a responsibility on him because he's that first, big Muslim character out there?
I don't think he's necessarily the first, by the way. Like, there's been a lot of shows, maybe not to the same scale and same popularity, but there has been other Muslim characters on shows and kind of Muslim focused shows. There was, I believe, the show, for example, I think this was in Canada, a Little Mosque on the Prairie, right? Something like that. But yeah. So there's been other shows. Now, if we're gonna say, well, this is the first one that blew up, so like he has a unique responsibility. I mean, I believe that every single Muslim, constantly, no matter what they're doing, has a responsibility to do a good job representing their deen. I do think that this is something that falls on every single one of us, especially if you're going to be on this big of a platform. I do think that we all have a responsibility to do that job, just because this is just something that comes with our role as being Muslims, But that is different, I think, than that point. And this is one of the reasons why, for me, it's like the conclusion. If somebody's conclusion after listening to everything that I've said, if they're saying Tareq is saying that this is a good show that everybody should watch and this is a good representation and everything about it was perfect, definitely not. I don't think, like I said, the production enough, like the way that the characters are engaging in things that are haram in real life. This is enough of a reason for me to say this is not something that, if somebody personally feels that they don't want to watch that they don't want to go near it, more power to you. You're more than welcome to. And this is also one of the reasons why I don't think that this thing should be just passively consumed as entertainment. This is just my personal opinion. But that I think is different than the critiques that the show is the critiques that the show is getting from some kind of religious people. And I think it really does take us away from the main conversation that we should be having. Like most of this conversation right now that we have been having on this podcast has been, how are Muslims being represented, the halal and the haram, etc., etc. The bigger conversation that I want to have, the thing that I think that we should be focusing on is what are we doing as a Muslim community to address all of the issues that Ramy's show raised. Ramy's show hit on a lot of things. It hit on, for example, mothers who dedicate their entire life to their family. And then as they get a little bit older and the kids kind of, mature and have their own lives, the mothers now kind of feel this sense of loneliness, a lack of fulfillment. Maybe they have a lack of affection in their lives. So what are we doing for our mothers? What about the question of, Muslim youth who feel this pressure to fit in with their classmates at school to the degree where they tell lies about who they are? Maybe, for example, it's out of the fear of being called a terrorist, like they show Ramy, as a child growing up when 9/11 happened, feeling like he has to lie to kind of fit in to impress the people around him. We see a lot of these issues, and I feel like so many of the people in the Muslim community have been they've rather than talking about these issues and asking what are we actually doing, how could we work on this, the conversation has gone to less productive places.
I definitely agree that there are a lot of issues that are brought to light, but the thing is, you just have to, like, from a Muslim religious practicing perspective, you just have to have those glasses on and you can filter through it and you can pick out and extract the main issues. And I guess when you do that, like from your perspective, Tareq especially, it makes it easier to kind of bring out those issues and issues and raise them and then have discussions on them. Like, I'll tell you now, like the scene about the episode about the mother, that definitely hit close to home. That made me kind of reflect on, my duties towards my mother, because she was kind of alienated at home, and then Ramy's just doing his own thing, and the daughter as well. You know what I mean? And that kind of made me reflect, like maybe I do that as well, as much as frequently as being a younger boy and stuff.
And you know what's funny, actually? You know what's funny? Somebody now the thing is we have this aversion when we're seeing the haram, and this comes from a good place, alhamdulillah, but we're having this aversion of like, oh, they showed zina, this is so bad, etc., etc. Why did nobody have outrage about what seems to be neglect from the children towards their mother? If we know that uquq al-walidain, being kind of not as obedient or righteous to the mothers, is such a major sin.
Because
are we going to say that this show normalized being bad to your parents?
It's already normalized. That's why.
See, like we have made this conversation so much about the easy things for us to comment on and point out that they are wrong. Because Muslims, the moment that we do that, I feel like so many Muslims are just like, astaghfirullah, look at all this zina. This is not how our community is. You're pretending that the Muslims are. It's like, bro, stop, man. That's not what the point of this show is. I know that it gives some people this feeling of maybe, alhamdulillah, we're better than this and we're protected from this, and maybe gives them a boost to be able to point out how wrong things are. But as Muslims, we really have to have we have to think on a deeper level than this. This is one of the reasons why when the Mad Mamluks, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you guys, when you guys were having the conversation about this, I was looking, I'm like, man, we need to do a better job of analyzing things like this on a deeper level, because the reality is there's going to be more efforts like this in the Muslim community. There's going to be more Ramy shows. There's going to be similar things. If the quote unquote religious community just comes out with these blanket condemnations and hate every time these things come out, what's going to happen is that eventually people are not going to even take our consideration seriously. They're not going to take our feedback seriously because we think in such a black and white mentality. And at the same time, I'm not sitting here saying that we should promote the show. I'm not saying that this is a good production to be on. I'm not saying any of that. But I'm just saying when we react to these types of things, we have to think in a much more nuanced manner if we actually want our feedback and our commentary to have any value to society. And that's what our reaction should be. That's what we should be concerned with. What are we doing to contribute to a positive change around us?
What do you guys think about the idea of a lot of the critique comes from self-righteousness?
The critique from who?
The critique of the religious community is coming from their own self-righteousness. Like, I think you touched upon a little bit.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
it's
because
you feel like you're actually getting rewards for just calling out like the obvious.
Yeah. And this is something that we see on social media all the time. We point out what's wrong, and everybody who agrees with us claps along. And then the people who might disagree with you are so alienated by that dialogue that you're actually not going to be able to help them. So if we're saying that this show is representing the Ramys of the world, do you think that our dialogue about it is actually helping those Ramys around us? From what I've seen, I don't think so. I know a lot of people who saw this show and they're like, yo, this is exactly what I went through. This is my story. Now what we should be doing is we should be having Muslims who are maybe not necessarily talking about the show, but Muslims who internally are using this opportunity to look within ourselves and say, what could we do to improve things? What could we do to reach out to these people? Spending all of our time critiquing whether it was halal and haram and whether people should watch it or not. The reality is people are watching it, man. People are watching it, and I'm not saying that because they're doing it that it's okay. What I'm saying is, since they're doing it, since these issues are these issues are being brought to light to more and more people, that puts a bigger onus on the quote unquote religious Muslims or practicing Muslims to actually own up and get things done and to fix them. It starts with a conversation. We can disagree with how the conversation is taking place. We can say that, we didn't like the language and maybe we didn't like the time and whatever it is. But at the end of the day, we actually have to now move this conversation away from just, raising the issue to now how could we resolve it so that the Ramys of the world don't feel like this actually represents them, so that we don't have more of them.
I think however,
and when I say, by the way, when I say when we don't have more Ramys, I'm saying basically people who feel like they are struggling and lost and they are looking for guidance and they are not able to find it. That's what we don't want people to feel like they're looking for guidance and they can't find it.
But the whole idea, I understand people can relate to it, and the haram black and whiteness, I definitely agree with you. We need to have proper discussions. Like, I'm not here. I'm not even saying the fact that there's nudity. I'm saying that there's no idea of I don't want to go into it, and it's going to digress a bit, but just the sense of what you're portraying is religiosity, but just really
they're representing a struggle to find religiosity. And the reality is, for a lot of people struggling, they don't have those guiding lights in their life. They don't have it, bro. Like, imagine this. The guy, Ramy, in the show, when he's trying to read Quran, he has an Arabic Quran open and he has an English translation open. That's something that I have actually seen from people. There are people, wallahi, I'm not exaggerating. There are Muslims who don't know that they can get a full English Arabic Quran physically or on their phone. I'm not even exaggerating with you. I've dealt with people like this.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of people struggling on that level, and we should be catering for that. But the idea,
but I mean, they are so far. I'm saying they are so far
there's no
from
hope.
religious figures.
If you think it from a production level, like Ramy, because there was that conversation of, I think it was like an interview where he said, if you try to appeal to a certain community, they'll just box you in, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess this is his artistic expression or whatever he's trying to do. But wouldn't you say there's, within that artistic expression, there should be ways of incorporating, hope or those sort of guiding lights, because it's not really getting that authentic Muslim experience. You get what I mean?
Okay, but again, man, it's like if we're gonna say that, go to that point, it is an authentic Muslim experience for some Muslims. That is an authentic experience for some Muslims. It's at no point is the show trying to give a universal message of this is what everybody's experience is. Like, I don't even know how much we can reiterate that point, because it's like This is just the reality. This is an actual experience for some Muslims. Now, in terms of giving hope, it is also authentic that some people in their journey towards Islam, they struggle to find that. This is something that Mahin touched on earlier. Like, it is sometimes this back and forth is really difficult for people. Like, they don't have anyone that they feel like they can turn to and connect with. And so we can disagree with that and say that this is not the ideal way to represent this journey. That's fine. But to push it as like this is inauthentic or this is what, I just don't think that's a valid critique.
Yeah, a lot of points there, but definitely in terms of the issues that were brought up, like definitely like one example is like the wudu scene. I think it was like the first episode where that definitely hit closer to home as well. The fact that, you know, there are religious people out there that portray Islam in a very strict manner, and it's sort of enforced upon you, right? Where we should be a bit more, you know, have a more of a soft approach and show, you know, the wisdoms. Like, for example, like when I saw that scene, I'm just thinking, bro, if there was someone that actually portrayed it in a, you know, in a soft manner and showing the beauty of Islam in the sense that there needs to be, you know, in religion, to get closer to God, there needs to be discipline, right? And that discipline manifests in your wudu as well, right? And this actually helps you helps you with your prayer and stuff, you know what I mean? But the reality, I agree that this is not the case. People won't want to explain religion in such a manner, right? It's really black and white.
Man, a lot of religious people don't even understand religion in that matter, let alone are capable of explaining it to others.
So I definitely agree with you that these issues that were highlighted in Ramy needs to be discussed and really needs to be brought up amongst the wider community and needs to be tackled, especially when we have a responsibility. Like I always say that, you know, being practicing Muslims, we actually do have more of a responsibility upon you can't just be a practicing Muslim, be in your own bubble and do your own stuff. You actually have to serve the community, to the people who are not so religious, right? I'm not talking from like saying I'm better and everyone's worse, but I'm just saying that, you know, in order to propagate the deen, I guess, we have these sort of moral responsibilities, and those are the sort of conversations that come to light watching those scenes in particular. So I definitely agree with you that there are issues and it needs to really be unpacked, because I agree. Like Ramy brought those issues to light, but I don't know if you disagree on the way that he did it. Like the way that he showed it is just like any other show that you'll see on Netflix, like any other kind of comedic.
No, they haven't. Again, it's like, bro, if that's the way that you're viewing it, man, you know what you need to do? You need to like take like a film studies class, or you have to like look at like, even, bro, there's a lot of good video essays on YouTube that will like critique shows and movies and stuff, give like analysis of it. I think you're missing a lot if you think that his representation of these issues is just like a generic representation. I don't think I've ever seen a more accurate representation. Whether we should show it or not is a different conversation, but a more accurate representation of the struggle of a person who does not have Islamic foundations or does not have strong Islamic foundations to find religiosity, that's not something I've seen before. I've never seen a more accurate representation of a person who has a weak foundation, who's trying to struggle to be practicing.
What's your take on it, Mahin? Do you feel that in terms of how the show, you know, showed its, you know, issues, I guess, amongst the Muslim community, it's like how any other show would show it?
I mean, I don't watch a lot of regular TV, to be honest. I don't know if I'd make that it's like every other show. I found the show entertaining, first of all. Like, I don't think we talked about that. I'm looking forward to season 2. I also will not pray anyone who wipes over their socks. Just be out there too. Like that. Like, I mean, I was probably more upset about that because I'm like, yo, dudes, like they're downplaying the issue of like washing your feet. But I mean, you know, I don't know if I have enough. I'm like not a big TV guy, to be honest. I haven't watched enough recent television to comment whether it's like every other show. I mean, some people I think made a comparison like, oh, I wish it was like Seventh Heaven. You remember that? You remember that show, Seventh Heaven?
I've never seen that.
Never heard.
It's basically a show on the network television here in America about like, you guys are pretty young. It was back in the day. It was back in like 10 years ago, about like a Christian pastor and his like 7 kids, right?
Oh, wow.
So it was like kind of toward moral, but they also had stuff going on like, you know, I think his like son ended up sleeping with some girl or something, and this and that. But I think people were expecting more of that, where they're showing like this model, pastor kind of leading his family through like.
This isn't meant to preach. This isn't
Yeah.
meant to preach. The goal of the show is to show a struggle. Like that's the goal. That's messy. Showing that is always going to be messy.
Right. I mean, if people want a good show for spirituality, they should go watch like Arturo or Yunus Amri. I think. I think that's the problem. I think people were like, listen, I love Arturo. Like, it's like my favorite show, right? I mean, a lot of the guys who were like saying, I think, like Humam, we're like big Arturo fans, right? I think somebody even in the comment thread asking them like, well, dude, what'd you expect, Arturo?
Yeah, literally.
I mean, I think it's not fair to Ramy to expect that. I thought the show was. I mean, I'm a very like as you hear me talk about like movies and TV on Mad Mamluks, you'll know that like I have pretty simplistic like tastes. I don't need a whole I don't need a whole lot as long as someone's like head's getting blown off every 10 minutes. I'm good. So I think I'm the wrong person to like talk about some deep like film study, but I felt the show was actually well done. For the most part, I thought a couple episodes. I didn't really like the 9/11 episode. I thought sucked. Like I thought,
that was so bad. What's with the jerking off stuff, man? That was horrid.
Yeah. I mean, it was way more vulgar than I would like.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was a pretty accurate representation of being a Muslim kid around a bunch of non-Muslim kids and trying to fit in. Like, I mean, this is something I was telling somebody earlier. Like. And this is a little bit kind of maybe more vulgar than some people are comfortable with. But I remember as a kid going to like some kids who were like in my neighborhood. I was like on my bike and I went past them, and I might have been like in 4th or 5th grade, and this kid might have been maximum like a year older than me. Him and those kids, they were all around my age, and they go, "Hey, are you a virgin?" And I was like, "What is that?" And they just blew up laughing. They're like, "What? You're a virgin? Wow!" And I was like, "Whoa! What are you talking about, man? No, I'm not. Of course not." And I'm like, "Kid, man, it's like this is so like and like so. What is it that they show in the whole 9/11 episode? They're showing him basically kind of quote unquote exploring with his body, like trying to figure stuff out, and they coincide it with. How basically he lies about about his experience with we'll call it sexual experimentation. He lies about it, and then 9/11 happens, and so he lies about his experience. They realize that he's lying, and then 9/11 happens. They go, "Are you a terrorist?" And he goes, "No," and they're like, "Well, you lied about your other stuff, so we're not going to trust you now." So it was like I thought that was actually the way that he tied in those issues. Of kind of those like kind of growing pains with the issue of terrorism, I thought that was actually really. So I thought that was well done.
I see what you're saying. Like you're I'm looking for a pure. See, to be honest, pretty early. So like I don't even know how you guys heard. I didn't even know about the show until like Kumam's review that Friday, right? He posted on Facebook because it was funny. Yeah. One of my employees at work was telling me, "Hey, Mahin, there's a show on Hulu about some Muslim kid." And I'm like, really? And this is like maybe like Thursday, the day before. And he's like, it looks pretty interesting. I'll check it out. And I was like, I didn't know what he was talking about. So I thought it was like maybe some Hassan Minhaj stuff or something, right? And then I see Humam's review, and I was like, oh, snaps. This looks pretty interesting. Because he just hated on it. I was like, I got to check it out. So I just binged it all that night. And I mean, early on, I was like, early on, I pretty much accepted it. It's not going to be like Arturo, but I'm like, it's kind of funny. His uncle was cracking me up. And so I'm actually, honestly, I'm watching it from the entertainment point of view. And that's kind of that's how I judged the episode. That 9/11 just wasn't entertaining, I think. That's kind of,
okay, yeah.
I'm not really like, I'm like, and I'm, as for these conversations, obviously I'm thinking about some of the issues that are being propped up, right? But I'm not like, at the end of the day, it's like I'm like Tareq, I will I would say I disagree with you on a lot of stuff, but on this show, I think that's like really like you're pretty much articulating kind of a lot of my thoughts. Like, I haven't had a chance, like on our show, pretty much. I was just like talking about how like awesome the car scene was, right? And the guys were like, "Shut up," right? But I'm looking at it from an entertainment point of view versus like some deep like search for truth story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get that, and that's what I think a lot of Muslims have done is like they've just watched it, they've had kind of that kind of superficial impression, and I don't think they realize that what he's doing with this show is not meant to be something that is just consumed for entertainment. Like entertainment is part of it for sure, but he is trying. Like this is meant to tell a deep story, a struggle, a challenge, and that's something that it's difficult. It's difficult to do it. And also, remain authentic. And I think for what he was trying to do, I do think he accomplished it. And again, that's not to say that I promote the show. Like I do think that anybody who's trying to just simply avoid the haram, it's better to avoid this. And I wouldn't even recommend the show in general for somebody who's just looking for entertainment. I think this is actually something that this should be considered as like a study of a big portion of the Muslim population. I'm not going to say it's the majority or whatever, but it's significant enough that a lot of people are watching this show and they've been saying, "Yo, this is the first time I felt like I've actually been represented."
And real quick, the issue of representation is funny because yesterday I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's like a DJ for ill Muslims, or he's like one of their. You guys have heard of ill Muslims?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, so one of my boys like DJs some of their events, and we were talking about how you remember that there was that video that came out, that Now This video, where there was like a commercial for ill Muslims. So interestingly enough, they got like a ton of pushback from like the Black and Latino communities, who are like Muslim communities, because they're like, "Well, you're not representing us," and it's showing. And it's like the problem, even with I don't know if Boys in the Cave, you guys are getting this, but Mad Mamluks, it's like everyone expects you to represent them because we're such a minority. Like you've got to like, it's like a one shoe fits all. You know what I'm saying? So I think that it's kind of unfair to expect Muslim voices to like be a one shoe fits all representation of the entire Ummah or North American Ummah or whatever, right? I don't think, especially when we're not claiming for that, right? I mean, I don't know what, maybe, Mad Mamluks represents a certain niche. Ill Muslims is probably catering to a certain niche. So is Ramy. So rather than superimposing what we expect, I mean, but I don't know how many times the people have come up. I was at the Siraj Wahad event last night. A friend of mine was like, "You guys are hating too much." I'm like, "What are you talking?" He's like, "That's what people like." He's like, "Yeah, but you guys have a huge platform. You got to be positivity. Everyone's relying on you." And I'm like, "We didn't ask for that. I mean, y'all ain't paying us, right? Maybe if we're on a bankroll, they could get it, but." I mean, we're not doing this for 9 to 5. It's just something we want to talk about, and we'll talk about it the way we want to talk about it. But it shouldn't, like, people shouldn't, and the people who like feel like we represent them will listen to us, and those who won't will listen to other stuff or do something else. And I think that's what at the end of the day is like. If you don't like Ramy, don't watch Ramy. I don't have. I've got some friends that probably are like Ramy, to be honest. I'm not like, and so that gives me that reality thing. I'm like, okay. Like, I don't think I'm in a bubble where I feel like a lot of Muslims are in this bubble where they're only interacting with like religious Muslims at the masjid, and then at work it's just the kuffar yani. You know what I'm saying? They're just dealing with, and it's just a very business as usual. They go to work, and like I don't know how many guys I know that are like that. Like it's and so you put yourself in this bubble, and then you see a TV show, and you're like, that's not reality. But at the end of the day, that is. I think that's what's going on, and I think we've got to like show compassion, because if you don't, this is why I really appreciate some of the work that, like, as people have their critiques of it, like I always tell people, like in Chicago, if I had like a non-Muslim friend or coworker, or if I had like a Muslim who's on the fringe, like someone who I grew up with but wasn't practicing, I won't take them to the masjid. I take them to like Ta'leef or Iman, these places where people aren't going to be, because we always hate on the don't judge me culture, but the reality is like people need places to incubate, right, and then grow themselves and develop, and then they eventually they won't need that anymore. But those spaces are necessary, or those people are necessary. Sometimes in places like probably Windsor, or I know in Sydney you guys have Mizan Avenue. It sounds to me like they're that kind of environment, right? So I think in like if there's no Ta'leef or Iman or Institute or Mizan Avenue in your community, if you're a religious Muslim, then you need to be that person for people, because at the end of the day, I mean, they probably know it's haram. Ramy knows that zina is haram. He tells that Jewish girlfriend of his in episode 1, right? Like, oh, I'm not supposed to be doing this.
Yeah.
Like, that's the point. Like saying, oh, dude, it's haram, smack you upside the head. It's like, yeah, like when I walked into my friend's house that day on Eid in 2005, and he's holding that baby that's like a child out of wedlock, and I was like, oh, we can't be boys no more. What good would that have done? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And that's I want to kind of just jump on that a little bit. That's this whole idea of like the way that we interact with this kind of Muslim population, quote unquote. I think it's really important for us when the way that we talk about, for example, a show like this, when there are Muslims who are expressing positive feelings about the show, and they like the show, they like the idea, and then I feel like some of the quote unquote religious Muslims, they might think that this is like, oh man, you guys are okay with like the zina that's shown, you guys are okay with all of this haram, with the doing you're okay with seeing Muslims that do this. That's not necessarily what a Muslim who likes the show or who has a positive thing to say about the show is thinking. They might actually just be happy that these issues are being brought to light so that hopefully we can move past them. They might finally feel like, yo, there's somebody who is on TV who is talking about wanting to be a good Muslim, as Ramy does repeatedly in the show, and who's not acting like being religious is something to run away from. This is something, it was a point, I don't remember exactly who made it, but they were saying that, Ramy is one of the first shows that shows Islam as something that should be that people should run to and not run away from. A lot of the representations of Muslims in popular culture does the opposite. It shows this person who says, look at me, I'm running away from Islam and towards this kind of monoculture. And so I think in general, when we're talking about the show in public, especially, we should be, I think, less concerned with attacking the show. And if you just don't want to watch the show because you want to protect yourself from the sins, I feel like that's what it should be about, rather than just demonizing the show and everything about it. Because I just think that if we talk about it like this, there are a lot of people who actually want to grow from this experience that, they might just be alienated.
Do you feel that I definitely agree with the idea of, incubation, and everyone has their own place and they can relate to all these sort of aspects. Like you brought up the example of Ta'leef. I know it's pretty big out in America, all that sort of stuff, right? Ill Muslims as well. My only concern would be, where would we draw the line? Because at the end of the day, you can look at something and gain the positives, leave the negatives, and be like, look, we're extracting the good stuff. There's a lot to take away from here, right? You can literally do that with anything. So where do you actually draw the line and say that, this is, we can't deal with this now? You get what I mean? Because let's just I'll give you an example. Maybe, I don't know, porn, for example. It could be, I don't know, Muslims could extract good things out of it if they really want to look at it from that lens. You could do that with almost anything.
Did you say porn?
Oh my God, what?
I'm giving an example of like the idea of extracting good out of anything. You get what I mean? So I'm saying, where do you draw the line there?
Well, the line is definitely not at pornography. That's definitely not there. I mean, again, it's like, I'm not sure. I'm not even exactly sure, like, what exactly this means, because I don't think, I'm not saying that, for example, this show is the correct way to represent this, but I think a lot of people are acting like they had a chance to be in the director's chair. Like they had a chance to, bro. It's like, in order to get the budget to produce a show like this, there has to be some of these compromises. I'm not saying that's okay. I'm not saying that this is something that we should be cool with. I'm just saying, like, we aren't in that position. So if I was speaking to a Muslim filmmaker, I would tell them, hey, don't do things that are haram, And if you have to show kind of a haram thing, it could be implied in a way that doesn't cause the actors to actually fall into haram themselves. So this is something that I would say, this is the ideal, okay? But if we're not talking to filmmakers, okay, if we're just talking to the general public now, my question is, what are we choosing to engage with and how are we choosing to engage with it? If there is something that is imperfect like Ramy, is the line going to be drawn that we should condemn this and everything associated with it, which is how many Muslims have reacted? The line is definitely not there. Should we be able to speak with it in a balanced way with positives and negatives? I think so. And so the line is not this clear-cut line of this is where we can condemn people. Right. I think every single piece of medium, every single piece of media, we should be able to sit with it, analyze it, the good, the bad, and we discuss from there. We don't have to paint this arbitrary line of this is what makes something condemnable, because things are rarely that clear-cut.
Yeah, I agree. Everything's case by case. By the way, I am not equating ill Muslims with ta'leef. All right.
yeah.
They're mentioning the same breath.
No, I'm saying
like completely different. Ill Muslims is a space to nurture if you're coming from a place that where it's like clubs with like vodka and hookers. That's the only
exactly.
environment. Then go to ill Muslims, but like that's not a spot I would like equate to like ta'leef or like a nurturing space.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm saying,
and that's exactly why. Like, for example, this actually goes back to the show, right? Ramy, like in many phases in the show, they show him in the show like sleeping around with women and doing whatever, blah blah blah. And then towards the end, who is the person that he has this now interest in? It's the girl that brought him to the masjid. So we can still disagree with that thing, but we can't be like, oh, we're right back at square one. If you think it's right back at square one, you aren't looking close enough. And I'm not saying you should be watching the kissing scene, but you know what I mean.
I think there's any final thoughts? I think we've covered a lot of points. I don't know if we're missing any major. I did want to add though. Do you feel that because you mentioned Mahin about Ertugrul, and if you want to get a spiritual high, you can watch one of those shows, right? Yeah. But I think this one's a bit different in the sense that it's a Western experience. It's an attempt to talk about the Western experience of a Muslim. You get what I mean? So it's a bit different in that sense. So that's where people are a bit more critical, because it's the closest kind of show to what we could possibly envision when it comes to the Western experience. So do you feel that perhaps it's we are relying too much on, I guess, big corporations like Hulu, Netflix to come up with shows that actually represent, how you mentioned, Tareq, like if you did productions differently, like you wouldn't obviously have scenes in that explicit nature, right? Would you say that it's about time that we create our own kind of narrative and platforms to get those type of shows that don't kind of embody explicitness and all that sort of stuff? Like, how would you go
definitely about time, but the thing is, when you're looking at these types of productions, there are productions like this, for example, I don't know necessarily how similar they are, but when you see, in Muslim countries where there's more money in kind of a more Muslim influenced industry, there is, I guess you could say more representations. If we're going to talk about in the West, like, is it about time? Sure. I mean, we would love to, but I don't know how many places, I don't know where in the West, you can get, say, for example, a Muslim organization is going to say, here's $2 million to make this show. I was like, this is not something that, I hope that the Muslim community can get to that point. I don't know if we're there right now. But I also think if that's what happened and you had, say, like a Muslim Netflix, right? The interesting thing is that might be better for the Muslim community, the practicing Muslim community, as well as, the Muslim community in general.
But there's a lot.
What's up? Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. Exactly. Now it's like, what about the rest of the people? So that's the interesting thing about Ramy, is that this is going to people who normally would never watch something about Muslims, including, by the way, Muslims. Like, they're watching this like, yo, I've never heard of this show, but I watch TV, I watch Hulu, and I'm seeing all of this everywhere. Let me go check this out. It's on a medium that seems normal because these people are very out of touch with, the Muslim community. And maybe they watch this and the message that they get is that, yo, I'm struggling with my religion, but Islam is not something for me to run away from. I should be trying to do something better. I should try to make Tawba. Maybe they only benefit, if the only benefit that they get from this show is that scene of Ramy talking to the convert, and they recognize that, yo, just because I've been sinning for so long, it doesn't mean that Allah's not going to forgive me. Maybe that act alone is something that, validates the that validates the benefit, I guess we could say, from this type of program, without necessarily saying that we support it and whatnot. Yeah.
I was showing from more like the perspective of, because obviously as Muslims, we don't show nudity, right? So let's just say we had to come up with a TV show that can cater to all people, not just in the sense of not showing explicit like haram per se, but then at the same time showing the real realities in the West. Like we do have to encounter all the issues I guess Ramy took that weren't shown in an explicit way, such as drinking or whatnot, or even zina, but showing it in a way where it's not explicit per se, but to hint at it and that it is a big issue. Or I don't know, even family dynamics, all these sort of major issues that the Muslims in the West face, right? It's kind of coming from a paradigm of showing it in an unhalal way, if you get what I mean. So I was just saying that perhaps maybe it's time from the religious side of people in the Muslim community, in order to showcase these issues, but being creative with it as well, right? You have to be. You can't just be very one-dimensional. You got to be very creative in showing these issues, right? But at the same time, showing the proper Muslim experience and showing hope and proper Tawba and the Islamic way, and showing the beauty of Islam. You get what I mean? Like understanding what like connection with Allah actually means. All this sort of stuff that I guess you could say that perhaps Ramy didn't show in the show Ramy, right? Would you say that it's about time that we perhaps make such a thing, right? If you get what I mean.
Yeah,
and we're perhaps
course.
lacking because it wouldn't just.
How so here's the thing, right? We're 1% of I don't know what your percentage is in Australia, right? We're 1% of the population. But first of all, I've got insider info that there was some Muslim organizations that had some money that helped put some money towards Ramy. FYI, I'm not gonna like disclose it because it was kind of said to me in confidence. But some of the like big donors did hook it up there, right? With that being said, is it worth our resources to? Because if we agree, we just talked about how like, okay, if we make a Muslim platform, it's gonna be for religious Muslims. You know what I'm saying? It's like that's who's gonna watch it, so they'll watch it.
Yeah.
And amongst that crowd, so you guys know that there's people that hate on Ertugrul. They're like, oh, you guys need to lower your gaze because there's sisters on screen. You guys should watch Ertugrul. There are people that comment on.
I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing at that to mock those people. I'm just laughing at like the contrast between that and what we're seeing with Ramy.
So like, what are you like? So you're always gonna have like, is giving because that's reality. If you do that, is giving Muslims mostly halal entertainment the priority? I don't think so. I mean, right? So like,
it's not necessarily.
You know what I'm saying? So
it's not necessarily like. I get what you're saying, but like for example, you walk into a movie like Avengers, everyone gets like a high, like everyone gets happy when the good person beats the bad guy.
Right.
You get what I mean? So you can always show. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're showing in a Muslim show that are practicing that it's just going to cater towards the very religious crowd. You can make it in a way where everyone can kind of vibe with it. Everyone has
but you have to realize something,
man.
People like what they can relate to, okay? And until the whole world is full of religious people are going to relate to the struggle more than they relate to perfection. That's just the simple reality.
No, but I'm talking about the movie also like it'll be based around the struggles, obviously, but giving the solutions as well in the process.
Yeah, and that's something, by the way, that Ramy hasn't necessarily failed at. We might see that later on. That is possible.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure you're talking about, for example, like Kingdom of Heaven, where I mean, Salah ad-Din's character he was shown pretty minimally, but I mean, that's a movie that's for the mainstream that people like. I thought he was a very positive representation of Salah ad-Din, right? If you guys remember that movie with Orlando Bloom, the Ridley Scott film,
yeah.
Or Malcolm X,
it was a decent movie.
As Denzel Washington as Malcolm X, like one of the greatest movies of all time. You don't have to be a Muslim to acknowledge that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like.
But see, that's where you have to choose which struggle you're representing. You have to show which struggle. If the struggle is going to be with religiosity, then that's the story that Ramy's choosing to tell. He's choosing an issue of basically trying to fit in this Muslim identity and the American identity. That's the struggle that he's choosing to represent. That anytime we're going to represent that struggle, it's going to be difficult to not talk about it in a way that gets people's sensitivities going. And
you got to show like, here's the thing, right? The standard, the baseline of what's allowable in like Hollywood is like pretty much like anything goes, right?
Yeah.
So like even like I was saying on the show last week, her mom was like, "Yo, dude, it's like porn, it's like nudity." I'm like, actually, there's not by Hollywood. Like Ramy would be outside. You know what Ramy? What makes Ramy explicit is the cussing. It's the F-bombs being thrown around. If you made Ramy,
I mean, you see people in their underwear too, but
it would be PG-13.
Yeah,
I mean, but it would be Ramy without the F-bombs would be a PG-13 movie.
Yeah, probably.
You know what I'm saying? It would not be. It's rated R. It would be rated R only because of the F-bomb. So language, for some reason, like yeah, kindergartners cussing, but somehow that's what makes something rated R. It's funny.
Honestly, you have like that's the thing. It's like I feel like these people who are so upset about the lack of sanitization, I guess, of this show. Like, I understand if you're upset with that on a personal level, that I don't want to see that. I agree with you. I don't want to see that either. But I just think it's like when you use that to dismiss everything that the show is doing, it just comes off as so self-righteous and so elitist and just out of touch with reality.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Like, you can definitely extract, like, there were obviously movies out there. Like, I think even do you remember, Mahin? It's probably your time. I don't know how old you are. You're probably you're probably young, alhamdulillah. But you know the message.
Mahin, what are you? 40, 45?
I'm 37.
Inshallah.
Mashallah, double my age.
So like,
no, I'm kidding.
The message was okay. I remember seeing that. I mean, Omar series killed it.
Yeah,
Omar series is like next level. Message, I guess people say for its time. Like I think I saw it in like the mid 2000s. I was like, it was okay. I didn't think it was that great. It wasn't like, yeah, I wasn't a big fan of the message. I saw it like once, and I was like, yeah, it was cool. But Omar series was like next level, and then Ertugrul just took it up another notch.
Yeah, I'm not big on all of those things. Just mostly just because like they're big like time sinks that I just haven't got to yet. But you know, if I could just make like one point, like if I could make like one last point, it would just be that I'm like kind of just sick of hearing the word normalization around this show. Like everybody's like, oh, it normalizes zina, it normalizes haram, it normalizes this. I'm like, listen, like, talking about something does not normalize it. And the way that you talk about it, it's either going to validate it, or you could just be talking about it in order to just like acknowledge the reality. And I feel like too many people have been using that word normalization to just shut down the conversation entirely. Like that's really that word of just normalization. My God, I saw somebody on Twitter the other day that just said something like, you're normalizing, they quote tweeted somebody and they're like, you're normalizing sins. I'm like, what does that mean? What do you think that means? Are we saying that sins are good? That's not what the show is doing, you know? So I don't know. I just think it's important for us to use more specific language and just stop using buzzwords.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
Yeah, I agree in the fact that it does limit discourse and that you need to you're only scratching the surface and you need to dig a bit deeper.
We have to be specific. We have to be specific and nuanced, both with what we are, praising and criticizing. And if you haven't seen the show and you're just like sitting and trashing the show on social media, like, get a hobby.
That's what I'm doing, alhamdulillah. But was there any other points you guys had? I think I'm gonna wrap this up soon because we've gone for quite a while. But any other final thoughts, Mahin or Tareq?
I wanted to say, first of all, I know I've kind of been a little bit critical of some of the points that you've made, Tanzim, bro. I want to tell you, man, I love you fi sabilillah, and I appreciate you and the whole team, especially for bringing light to these types of conversations, because we have to have these types of conversations, I think, in spaces where we can comfortably agree and disagree and kind of have a back and forth. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you guys in all of your efforts.
I mean,
yeah, I thought we were friends, but it doesn't seem to
we
be
are,
the case
we are
anymore.
definitely friends, bro. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you guys. Yeah, I think some people maybe at the end of this conversation, some people might just like simplify this and be like, oh, we were just kind of like at odds. I don't really think we necessarily are.
No,
if
you unpack it, a lot of stuff we said actually matches up. We were just discussing, like, for example, I'd say production, you could have been this and that. You're saying you're speaking from what actually happened, and things like, I think on the main points we're not too far off. It just seems like we're clashing in terms of, I guess, slightly different perspectives. But definitely like it's good to take away from both perspectives and understand, I guess, the nuances, because it is this new situation, I guess, the Muslim community is put in, especially like with the religious side of people. Because to see such a show that has such, you know, Muslim values being showcased with the West and what they're going through, it's kind of a new kind of situation that I guess practicing Muslims have to navigate through, if that makes sense.
I don't think we've seen something to this scale of popularity for sure.
Definitely. How about you, Mahi? Any final thoughts?
No, I'm good, man. It was a good conversation. You know, and I'm looking for. I gotta go eat some cereal right now.
I love it.
Pretty much it. I was like, I got the special K with berries waiting for me.
Mashallah.
Enjoy it, bro. Enjoy it.
What type of cereals do you have in America? It's like super different from here.
So I'm sorry.
We have like Weet-Bix, Nutri-Grain.
Honey bunches and oats, or is it honey bunches?
Okay, you know, I know we did the food thing last time. We should probably exchange cereals next time. We'll send some cereals.
Oh, I like that.
We should.
Yeah,
we should do drugs next as well. Different types of.
Mashallah.
Drugs,
Mashallah.
You said drugs?
This is
Mashallah.
He said drugs.
Hey man, you're
California Kush.
You like sent mail.
He's trying to get us.
See, that's like dangerous.
Normalizing, bro. I'm normalizing drugs, bro.
I feel like this. You know, I thought like I'm watching a show from entertainment value, right? I'm like the idea that we're gonna get upset about this. I mean, I could see it. Like people have made. There's a lot of extreme reactions for sure. I think that the one thing if people are gonna listen to this like almost 2-hour episode and then take away that like, you know, there's beef between Tanzim or Tareq, or there's like or something really simplistic. The problem with the community is that, man, nobody has like you know I don't know, like Tareq, you're on Twitter. That's why I'm not on Twitter. I get on Twitter just to like watch stuff, but like it's got to be a conversation, right? And then you'll do a podcast, and then somebody will comment about how they'll miss the point completely. Like you just like simplify, like it's not a simple issue.
Like the episode that we did with about the unnamed individual. I don't want to open up the topic here, but
if you do, I'll just go another 90 minutes.
yeah, literally. But yeah, it's like I did like an episode with like when I did one of the Mad Mamluks episodes, somebody just like reduced all of it to like Tawba is like anti this guy or something, or Tawba is this. I'm like, listen, bro, if that's what you took away, I'm really not interested in convincing you otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Like even words like normalization, white knight, it kind of, you know, I don't know, toxic masculinity, all these like terms that are just thrown out. It doesn't.
They're buzzwords that we just keep throwing out, and like there's so much emotional charge behind them that if you like them or if you dislike them, you will just automatically kind of like pick the side that hits that emotion that you already have. Yeah. And we have to be like, and I mean even like, for example, like Mahin, like you're saying, for example, like watching the show, like you're just doing it for entertainment, for example. Like that's something that we could even unpack. We can unpack that for hours. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like for me personally, if somebody said, "Hey, I want to watch this for entertainment," I'd be like, try to watch something maybe that doesn't have haram if you want. You know what I mean? At the same time, there's obviously much less haram, I think, in this than a lot of popular shows. But like, I don't know, it's like that is even different than like the people who are just trying to be like, I don't know. Anyway. This can go on.
There's actually the whole thing about like meeting people where they're at. I think that's like one of the takeaways Tareq really pushing at. He's like, really, this is something that I really agree with you on, is because when you're dealing with like I was talking to so alhamdulillah, you know, Sheikh Sohaib called me last week. I think on Friday it was. He called me Friday. He called me after Jummah, Sohaib Webb, and just to catch up and stuff. And we talked for like 10 minutes, But you were talking about like how some of the hate he gets because he's like appears to be like. I had one brother ask me, "Is Imam Sohaib Webb one of these SJW imams?" I'm like, "What does that mean?" It's like you attach this loaded like label, right? And then we're talking, and we're talking about like some things what Mad Mamluks does and our platform and whatnot. And he was like, the thing people don't understand about. He's like, "Listen, bro, like I deal with people who are leaving the deen. Like that's the kind of." I've got to go down to the bare minimum of which acceptable by ijtihad. Even if it's like a really
Yeah.
weak opinion somewhere, just to keep somebody, because that's what we're struggling with. And I think that, and I've talked about this on another podcast with Sufyan Andalusi, that we Muslims, all three of us were born in the Muslim families, we have a privilege sometimes that we were born into families where our parents at least taught us like at least the basics of religion. Like, Ramy's situation is that he's growing up in like, that's one thing that Humam's point I agreed with, is that, some of these families aren't teaching their kids diddly squat, right? Like, and I know I live in a predominantly Arab community, and I remember I've gone into the masjid. Sometimes the sheikh will be leading a circle after Fajr. Everyone reads Quran, and like these Arab kids can't read a thing. Like, it's bad, and you're like, and it's not their, and it's probably not their fault. They're 13, 14, 15 years old. It's because their parents didn't teach them anything. You know what I mean? And I think we have to. I as much as we hate on like privilege and stuff, I definitely think there's a born Muslim privilege, especially when you're born into a family that has values, that we take that for granted and then superimpose that on everybody else. So when you see somebody doing stuff, you're like, man, what's up with that dude, right? But rather we got to meet people, and I don't think people can recognize if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I ain't trying to deal with that, then like I'm like, you need to get out of your bubble. You got to go meet some cats. Go meet some converts. You know what I'm saying? Go meet some people who are new to the deen or fringe people, and then maybe they'll change your reality, or maybe you'll just be like, astaghfirullah, okay, yani, they are whatever, right?
And bro, you know what? If there are people that like they don't want to deal with that, out of, for example, they like just preserving their own faith and preserving their own, whatever, for their own safety of maybe their heart or their spirituality, whatever it is, you're free to that. You're free to that. But like those of us maybe who are trying to be maybe to take on a more active role in reaching out to Muslims like Ramy. If we care about reaching out to the Muslims like Ramy, we cannot be promoting the type of some of the toxic kind of narratives that we've seen kind of coming out. And I do think that we do need more Muslims who care about reaching out to these people, because it's a growing population. The fitnas and the problems that are coming out in the West right now, as well as all over the world, they're getting harder and harder to deal with. So as Muslims, I do think that if there's one thing we could take away maybe from this show, it's a very human representation of these people. It's a very human representation of this part of this population. It doesn't matter if it's the majority of Muslims. It doesn't matter how big the size is. It humanizes them. Where you can no longer just be like, these people are just they're evil. They hate Islam. They just want to be liberals. They just want to they want the approval of white people and blah blah blah. No, man. There's a lot of Muslims who they really want to be connected to this deen. But sometimes the pull of both like the nafs and its desires, as well as society and the poor foundations to respond correctly, it makes you fall back over and over and over again. And we need to view these people as Muslims first and foremost. If they identify as a Muslim and they want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to view them with that hope. And you want to be a person who brings them closer, not who draws the line and says, "You're over it, dude. You're out." We don't want to be those people.
Yeah, definitely interesting thoughts. I'll probably wrap it up there, but we could probably go on forever. But Jazakallah khair for both of you guys for coming on Boys in the Cave. It was good discussion, diverse opinions, and inshallah, people find benefit from this conversation, inshallah. So,
inshallah ta'ala.
From our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com or find us on Facebook, and you can follow our journey through Instagram. Please leave a 5-star rating on iTunes, as that greatly helps us. And Tareq, for people who want to check out your stuff, I know you have your social medias. Do you have anything? Where can people check you out?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and Twitter primarily as Ibn Abi Tareq, IBNABITAREQ. There's a project I'm working on with a team of pretty awesome individuals that'll be launching hopefully in the next few weeks. So hopefully, inshallah, during summer 2019, essentially. So check it out on if you follow my Twitter and or you just check out my Twitter, Instagram. You'll find links there, inshallah, once it's up.
Inshallah, I'll put it up on the show notes as well for others to kind of check out. But yeah, wish you all the best for your project. Sounds exciting, and I know you gave me a bit of insight into it as well. So it looked really good, mashallah. So
Barakallah feek, bro. I hope there's some benefit, inshallah.
Inshallah. So from our special guest Tareq, special co-host Mahin, I don't know if he was really a co-host, but I'll just say he's a co-host, and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.